Hey guys, Sean here, and welcome to the F1 Word, powered by planetf1.com. Now, it was an enthralling Azerbaijan Grand Prix, which gave us a three-car, three-team battle at the front, faster cars recovering through the field, some impressive performances as well, and high drama right towards the end of the race. Basically, lots of talking points from across the weekend, and so here is a look at our winners and losers from Sunday's race at Baku. So for our first winner, or winners today, we're going with McLaren, and yes, that includes Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. Starting with race winner Piastri, it was a superb drive from the Aussie, arguably his best so far in F1, which included a fantastic late-breaking move to take the lead from Charles Leclerc, a move he made despite his race engineer asking him not to because of fears he may overcook his tyres, but Piastri, quote, completely ignored him the next lap and sent it down the inside. That was, of course, though, only part of the job, as he spent the rest of the race holding off the chasing Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez to claim victory. Not bad for a number 2 driver, as his manager Mark Webber once said. It is a win that may well prompt the question of whether he has brought himself into play for the Drivers' Championship title, and even if becoming a support act for his teammate over the rest of the season is fair. However, Piastri is still 32 points behind Lando Norris and 91 behind Max Verstappen, so mathematically speaking, he is in the mix and took a huge chunk of points out of the Dutchman's lead thanks to his win in Baku. Realistically, though, it is a very tall order, and it's still likely, should they find themselves together on track, he will still be called upon to help Norris in his championship challenge. 2025, though, could be a very different story, and a fascinating one at that. On Lando Norris, his weekend wasn't perfect following his Q1 elimination on Saturday, which saw him qualify 17th and start 15th after other drivers took penalties. His race was very much all about damage limitation as a result, and limit the damage he did with an excellent drive to eventually take P4 and finish ahead of Max Verstappen. He also played a huge part in Piastri's win, having held Sergio Perez up on the Aussies in lap, which enabled him to rejoin the race ahead of the Red Bull. A very smart call by the team that was very well executed by Norris. Now, it was only a 3-point gain on the championship leader, which, if replicated for the rest of the season, is nowhere near enough to mount a serious challenge, and naturally there will be some frustration and anger because a win could have been on the table had the Brit qualified in a more representative position. But given how badly things could have gone, Norris would have taken that if offered before the lights went out on Sunday afternoon. As a team, though, McLaren were without a doubt the big winners in Baku. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, they have taken the lead in the Constructors' Championship, the first team other than Red Bull to top that table since they took the lead at the 2022 Spanish Grand Prix. Yes, it has been a long time coming, and McLaren have been the favourites for the team's title for a while, but this is a big moment in that battle. Many will argue that nobody cares about the Constructors' Championship as it's the driver's title that carries the prestige, but the teams absolutely do, because ultimately that is the championship that pays out the cold hard cash, and on current form, McLaren looks set to get the big bucks come the end of the season. Drinks on Zach Brown. Moving on, though, and the first to make it onto our Baku losers list is perhaps unsurprisingly Max Verstappen. It was overall a pretty miserable weekend for the championship leader. After all, he was out-qualified by teammate Sergio Perez for the first time this season on Saturday, and just never looked like he had the pace to get anywhere near mounting a podium challenge, let alone fight for the win. Oddly enough, Sergio Perez was in the mix for victory and looked almost a certainty for a podium until the closing stages, so to see Verstappen so far off was almost jarring. Despite ending up 5th come the checkered flag, believe it or not, there are a couple of positives for him to take away from Baku. Whilst it won't have been enjoyable and certainly wasn't a good look to see his title rival breeze past and finish ahead of him despite starting so far back, he did ultimately only drop 3 points to Norris, and so he maintains a healthy lead at the top of the standings. There were also signs across the weekend that Red Bull's car changes may have had a positive impact on their pace, and that could prove vital in Verstappen's bid to become a 4-time world champion by the end of the season. Of course, yeah, it could have all been a big coincidence and was simply specific to Baku, but Red Bull will be hoping that's not the case. A lot of question marks still remain, and although that's not the worst result of his season, this one will sting for Verstappen because even with those positives, it was still a crushing defeat and a frustrating race for the Dutchman, and he'll be hoping his car is better in Singapore than it was in Azerbaijan, and indeed than it was at Marina Bay 12 months ago. Next up, we return to the winners, and our second entry this week is Williams with a special mention for Franco Colapinto. Firstly, though, Alex Albon was excellent in the race as he managed his tyres perfectly during the long first stint and eventually took a P7 finish. Arguably not a massive shock to see him pull off such a strategy, as he's done it before to grab a strong result for the team, and we already know that when he's given a car capable of taking points, he tends to deliver. It was also really impressive to see how well he drove to keep the much faster Lando Norris, Max Verstappen and at one point George Russell at bay before he pitted. As good as he was though, and he was, the attention was very much on his teammate. He bounced back from his practice crashing style, making Q3 on Saturday, where he out-qualified Albon and eventually took 8th place in the race in only his second race weekend in Formula One. Okay, Albon didn't get his second run in Q3 and he inherited P8 on Sunday thanks to the late crash, but that should not take anything away from what was an excellent performance across the 2 sessions that really matter. Even if that crash didn't happen, he still likely would have ended up inside the top 10, which would still have been just as impressive. That double points finish for Williams also moved them ahead of Alpine in the Constructors' Championship, which according to Albon was their goal by the end of the season. And although it was only one race and who knows what could happen between now and the end of the season, James Vowles' decision to swap Sargent for Colapinto has arguably already been justified given that the change was made to give the team the best chance of scoring points. Colapinto grabbed 4 in Baku alone, Sargent scored 1 in just over a season and a half. Moving back to our list of losers, and this one is another group's choice. Yes, it is Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez. It is really frustrating they make this list because both drivers had at worst good races up to lap 49. On a track he has always gone well at, Perez looked back on strong form and was the better of the 2 Red Bull drivers almost all weekend. And although he was beaten by his teammate in qualifying and on race day, Sainz wasn't a million miles away, and once Leclerc's tyres fell off the cliff he had a shot at second place. However, that all almost adds to the argument for why they are picked for the losers list. All of that was thrown away in a split second which saw both drivers eliminated from the race, their hard work undone. The collision was ultimately deemed a racing incident by the stewards as they did not believe that either driver was wholly or predominantly to blame. In the case of Sergio Perez, there has been an argument that perhaps he should have banked his points given how tough things have been of late and that Sainz should maybe have just tucked in behind Leclerc rather than having a look around the outside of his teammate at turn 2, which gave him the bad exit and brought Perez into play. But as we said in the race reaction on Sunday, that is not in a racing driver's nature, especially when they're in the heat of battle and when you consider that Leclerc's tyres had gone. So it's easier said than done. Ultimately though, racing incident or not, it is a shame that both drivers' races fell apart as a result of a collision that, looking back the next day, looked clumsy and frankly wholly unnecessary. The last one on our main winners list for Baku is Fernando Alonso, who did what Fernando Alonso often does and drove that Aston Martin to a very good result, and that would have still been the case even before the Sainz-Perez crash. It was, by his own admission, a bit of a lonely race for him, and it did feel as though he almost came out of nowhere to get that result, but he managed his race really well, always looked on for a points finish, and even kept Albon at arm's length despite the Williams drivers' fresher tyres and pace in the closing stages to take P6, which is a fantastic haul of points and a much-needed boost for the Silverstone-based team. There wasn't an awful lot more he could have done, but everything he did do, he did very well and was rewarded come the end of the race with his best finish since the Canadian Grand Prix in June. And the final main pick for the losers list is Charles Leclerc. It feels a little bit like an odd choice when you look at the results of the race in isolation, because he did finish in second place and picked up some very good points. However, that doesn't really tell the whole story. The reality is that for the 4th year in a row at Baku, he failed to convert pole position into victory, although he did get his best results at the circuit if we look at the positive side of it, and quite frankly was lucky to even hang on to that second place. His rear tyres fell off the cliff and he had to fight hard to keep Sergio Perez at bay in the closing stages, and it was likely only the collision between Perez and Sainz that allowed him to keep hold of P2. Had they carried on, he may well have ended up in 4th place. But it's his racecraft that also plays a huge part in why he is on our Baku losers list. Oscar Piastri's move to take the lead was absolutely bold, ballsy and beautiful. However, the truth is Leclerc left the door wide open and the Aussie threw himself through it and never looked back, well, apart from checking his mirrors to defend, obviously. There is a good chance that the McLaren's pace on a hard tyre would have meant Piastri took the win anyway, but the task should have been made so much harder by Leclerc. It is also possible that had he kept the lead, he'd have had the clear air to manage pace and tyres, and so his rears may have survived. We'll never know, of course. And it is Charles Leclerc who is the topic for our question of the day. Do you think Ferrari should have tried something different on strategy, bearing in mind how much quicker Leclerc was on the mediums? Or do you believe that Piastri was just the quicker driver overall on Sunday and there was nothing different Ferrari could have done? You can let us know what you think in the comment section down below. Before we wrap this up then, there are a couple of drivers, one winner and one loser, that deserve an honourable mention. Nico Hülkenberg makes our losers list because of whatever weirdness was going on at the end of the race. He hadn't driven badly and looked like he was on for a point. However, as he passed Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz, who were in the wall, he was caught out by how quickly the green flag was flown and was, there's no other way to put this really, mugged by Lewis Hamilton and Ollie Bearman, which resulted in the German dropping out of the points paying positions, a costly error from the Haas driver. And as it turns out, our honourable winner mention is another Haas driver. Yes, it's Ollie Bearman. It was a really good first full weekend for Bearman, who, like Colapinto, bounced back well from a frustrating practice crash. He out-qualified Hülkenberg on Saturday, and although fortunate to pinch a point thanks to his teammates' momentary lapse, he didn't make that same mistake and capitalised on it to make it 2 F1 starts and 2 F1 points finishes. It was also a lot of fun watching his fight with Lewis Hamilton. We often see, don't we, drivers in the midfield and further back effectively wave faster cars by because that's not their race. So it was really, really nice to see Bearman willing to defend hard but also fair. Oh, and a super quick nod as well to George Russell, who drove a well-managed race to put himself into the top 5 and, as it turned out, into a position to capitalise on the crash ahead to inherit a podium finish. So what do you think to our winners and losers selections this week? Who would you add or remove from our list? You can let us know that and your own winners and losers for Baku in the comment section down below. And to catch up on the latest Formula One news and reaction, head on over to planetf1.com. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.